Hi, I'd like to go over some of the assignments that you'll be responsible to complete for this course. This is one of my favorite assignments, and it's related to collecting information of a very systematic methodology for students with moderate to severe disabilities. Frequently, you may have seen that when you're looking at traditional norm reference or criteria reference assessment data on your students, it may not be as useful as it is with other students. You may see things that the student cannot do, or in fact those assessments don't often validate things that the student can do because they're not assessed in that, or communication delays or other access challenges arise so that you don't get a lot of really great helpful information. This assignment is set up to help you conduct an assessment that is very personalized to that student and look at their strengths, their interests to help motivate them toward instruction, and the culture and context in which they live and the future that they envision for themselves or that their family see for them. This is called a person-centered approach to IEP development and instructional planning. The IEP, or the person-centered planning process, is frequently used in planning for adulthood and through transition, but it is something that's extremely valuable even with young children as you're working with families and getting to know that student on a very intimate level. This assignment has actually 6 parts to it that you'll be completing throughout the term, beginning with the first part due week 2, and the completion of all of 6 parts kind of compiled together and turned in week 7. This is your final signature assignment, which will be uploaded into Sakai and also posted onto TaskStream. So let's kind of walk through the parts. But before we do that, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that you'll be completing this person-centered profile utilizing a form or a template. Each time that you work on that, you will complete that section that is due, and even if and turn in the entire document, even if parts of it are not complete to you. And then after I grade one part, you will get revisions and see those revisions. You can make changes to that part that was completed and feedback was provided, but it won't be regraded until the very end when it's turned in week 7. Then I will look again at the totality of the document and revisions that were made and rescore your work. So you'll get feedback and you can do some revisions piece by piece. Okay, so let's talk about the first section. This will be where you're going to be identifying your focus student, and that's due week 2. So I'm hoping that you have access to students in some degree. Either I've seen people utilize students at their church or a school that you're working with or other environment. It does need to be a student who is in K-12 or in public school or private school, but age 3 to 22, since that's the educational age range of our students. They do have to be someone who is categorized as having a moderate to severe disability that you have access to, that you can actually work with and collect some data yourself. You need access to their school records for this assignment, and in the future you'll be talking heavily to the students' parents. So they will be very much involved in helping you collect some information. So if this first assignment, you're just identifying the student and giving some sort of basic overview of who they are based on the written documentation that you can find in school records. And the basic information is really just the name, age, grades, what is their qualifying disability, where are they educated, their level of communication, and sort of a general academic level as far as reading, writing, math, that sort of thing. And it's a brief description, and you'll be using this brief description multiple times in your form just to help us remember who your student is and what grade they're in and that sort of general description. So keep that in mind, and This is one of the most challenging parts, is just finding that person that you have great access to. So that's part 1. Part 2 of the signature assignment is called the Review of the Records assignment, and it's due week 3. Basically, again, you're just looking at the formal and informal data that is available to you in the student's educational records. These can be the CUM or an IEP, psychoevaluation assessment, and you're sort of summarizing that information, getting to know the student through the written documentation that's available. And then recording that information on the personal profile. There's a series of questions and headings there that kind of guide you to collect information on their academic ability, their communication ability, and to go a little bit into more depth there. So you can use the form as a guide to see what we're looking at there. There's also an exemplar that you can, in resources for completed personal profiles, so you can get an idea of the depth of information that I'm looking for, you should be collecting in that review of the records. Part 3 is your person-centered interview, and this is a big chunk of the personal profile and probably the most interesting and most fun part of this assignment in many ways. And that's because you get to interview, using the profile as a guide, interview the student if possible, and I know some of our students are not able to communicate in a traditional manner, or they do not have a communication device, but as much as possible you're going to ask the student some questions if you can, and then you're also going to interview a family member who knows the student very well. And the focus of this interview is to get to know the student, the interest, their strengths and weakness, as well as some needs, kind of what is their typical day look like outside of school, what are some things that they love, what are some things that they don't like, so that we can avoid those, and what are some other important cultural or ecological factors that we need to consider. But families are a tremendous asset to gather information, particularly for students who have limited communication needs. We need to get to know them very intimately, and this interview will greatly help you. It will probably take you a couple of hours to do this interview, and the preference is that you do it not in a school environment if you can help it, but that you can go into the student's home or a coffee shop. The home is actually better because you get to see the student in their most comfortable environment. How they interact at home may be very different than how they interact at school, and you may see some skills that you have not been able to see before. So it's a great way of building trust between you and the family, and a level of intimacy, both in knowledge but in also relationship. If there was a single thing that I did as an early special education teacher was to that paid off in dividends, it was to collect or to do a home interview with families. It was a tremendous asset. So I hope it's as enjoyable to you as it was to me. So that is due week 4 and is worth 10 points. So part 4, you're going to take a look at some of this data that you've collected now in order to develop some goals for the student. So you're looking at their academic review and the interview with the family, the teacher, and also the Common Core standards for their grade level, and try to align some of the students' needs and goals with the Common Core standards, and we'll be talking about how to do that in the future. But in this assignment, you're going to be developing 5 IEP goals that are very measurable. You need to collect some baseline information about the goal. In order to write a measurable goal, you have to kind of collect that information so we know where the student's at, and then we're going to move forward from there. And these goals will be documented in part 4 of the personal profile. Alrighty? All right, let's take a look at part 5. After you have got to know your student, you've developed some relevant and culturally responsive goals that are aligned with the Common Core standards, you're going to be taking a look at how we're going to provide instruction to achieve those goals and develop a plan for that. So this assignment is called the Instructional Planning Assignment, and it's due week 7. And for each of the goals that you have developed for your student, you're going to be identifying the appropriate instructional strategy to use with them. You may be using direct instruction, you may be doing some inquiry learning or ABA or chaining, developing a task analysis. All of those instructional strategies we'll be talking about in class, so you'll be applying your learning there. You'll also take a look at any adaptations or modifications of technology that you're going to be using. This will be identified as the technology component that's integrated into your assignment. We are going to be doing a bibliography, so you might be utilizing that to boost and applying that information into this assignment. You're also going to be attaching or describing the data collection form that you'll be using to collect data and to give you some ongoing information about how the student is achieving that goal. And then also, I would like you to consider what recommendations you would make for this student at their next IEP meeting that would foster greater inclusion. Throughout this course, we're going to be talking about inclusive education and the benefits of having students kind of operating in the real world alongside of students or adults that do not have developmental disabilities. And so I want you to kind of think through how we could foster that with this particular student in mind. Okay, so that's part 5. Also, week 7 is kind of the culmination of all of the work up to this point. So consider the feedback that you've gotten along the way from me and the rubric for the assignment. You're going to be revising parts 1 through 4, completing part 5, and put it all together and upload this personal profile into both TaskStream and to Sakai. A note, as usual, that you're going to be using APA style in this presentation, although it's kind of the form is going to be utilized heavily as well. But if there's references to research, which would be great, you're going to certainly cite those as you would in any other manner for APA. Okay? Next, I want to take a look at your multiple media presentation assignment. This also relates to the person-centered plan that you're going to be developing, and it's due week 8. It's meant to highlight your work so that you can use this as a portfolio piece that is highly visual, that sort of summarizes the work that you've done as an example of high-quality, individualized instructional planning that you're able to do, assessment and instructional planning that you're able to do with a student with mild severe disabilities that you can use when you're interviewing or to highlight your work to potential employers, etc. All right, so week 8, this is due, but you're basically going to be taking your person-centered instructional plan and converting it into a multimedia format that showcases your work. So the content of this presentation will include an introductory summary of the students, kind of highlighting what you learned about them, their strengths. It's definitely a strengths-based approach. Their academic ability and their communication, want to say really positive. To make it more personalized, you may want to include a photo. This is to be kind of visually appealing. It's not an actual photo that I would use, but a pseudo photo of the person to kind of make it more realistic to the audience. And then you're going to summarize what you discovered through your interview process, like what's important to the student in terms of preference of instructional strategies, environment, social environments. In other words, the student learns best when these kind of things. Also include things that you learned to avoid that are potential triggers for the student or provide stress to him or her. Things that are important for the student to keep him safe and learning to the best of their ability. And then students' preferences as far as experiences or their dreams for their future, their particular interests that you might tie into your instructional planning. And then the summary of the goals that you selected for that person. And and those kind of goals should tie back to the person's interest, who they are personally, their future goals, and things that are important to them. So altogether, you're looking at about, at the most, 10 slides that kind of highlight the work that you've already completed. And that's due week 8 and is for 12 points. Okay, our final assignment or project is related to an observation that you're going to be completing and then a reflection on that observation. This is due week 5 and it's worth 9 points. I'd like you to visit an inclusive setting. An inclusive setting is defined as a setting where students with disabilities are not separated from typical children, so that you can see inclusion in action. This setting can be school, church, a community environment, that kind of thing. And you're going to be writing a report, no more than 2 pages, about what you saw in that setting. Describe it. Describe the interaction between your focus student or other students that do not have a disability with those who do. Actually, this observation does not have to include your focus student. It would be great if it did, but it's not limited to that. It just has to have some students who would be considered to have a moderate to severe disability and children who do not. How is that student with disabilities being accommodated in this environment, and is there any other recommendations that you would provide? Now, there is a difference between inclusion and mainstreaming. Inclusive settings, that student is a full member of that class or that activity or that church. They're not seen as a visitor that is being permitted to come into that class for a single period of time. Now, if you cannot find a truly inclusive setting, you may have to look at a class where students are being mainstreamed in, where they're kind of guests in the room, but that's not normally where they are. That's less preferable, but if that's your only option, then that would fulfill the responsibility of this assignment. But there's some philosophical differences between mainstreaming and inclusion that I just wanted to point out to you that we will also be discussing in the term.